I thought I knew my family until I found out my parents secretly used my grandmother's inheritance, meant for my college fund, to buy my spoiled sister Kelsey a brand new BMW. What hurt more was discovering this betrayal while sitting beside my dying grandmother in hospice care. But Grandma wasn't as helpless as everyone thought. With one phone call, she set in motion a chain of events that would expose 20 years of family lies, financial manipulation, and favoritism that ran so deep it would destroy everything my parents built on stolen foundations. Before we dive into how my grandmother became the ultimate revenge mastermind from her hospital bed, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. If family betrayal stories get your blood boiling like mine does, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this tale of justice will have you questioning everything you think you know about blood loyalty. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. My name is Serafina, and I always believed my parents were decent people who made mistakes like everyone else. That illusion shattered completely 3 months ago when I was 22 and desperately trying to figure out how to pay for my final year of nursing school. I had been working double shifts at the local diner, surviving on ramen noodles, and hope when my younger sister Kelsey casually mentioned over Sunday dinner that Mom and Dad had surprised her with a $30,000 BMW for her 18th birthday. My fork froze halfway to my mouth as I watched her scroll through Instagram photos of her shiny new car, complete with custom leather seats and a premium sound system. Wait, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Where did that money come from? The silence that followed was deafening. My father suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes, while my mother busied herself refilling water glasses that were already full. Kelsey, oblivious to the tension she had just created, continued gushing about how all her friends were so jealous of her new ride. "We saved up," Mom finally said, not meeting my eyes. "You know how good your father is with managing money." But I knew our family's financial situation better than anyone. Dad worked as a mechanic at a small garage, and Mom cleaned houses part-time. We had never been poor, but we certainly were not $30,000 for a surprise car wealthy. I had been watching them stress over mortgage payments and utility bills my entire life. That night, I could not sleep. Something was terribly wrong, and the pieces were not adding up. I remembered my grandmother mentioning several times over the years that she had set aside money for my education. Grandma Rose had always been proud of my academic achievements and constantly talked about how I would be the first in our family to graduate college. The next morning, I drove to Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility where Grandma Rose had been living since her stroke 2 years earlier. I found her in the garden, sitting in her wheelchair with a blanket across her lap, looking frailer than I had ever seen her. "Serafina, darling." She smiled when she saw me, but I noticed her hands shaking more than usual. "I was just thinking about you." "Grandma, I need to ask you something," I said, pulling up a chair beside her. "Do you remember that college fund you set up for me, the one you mentioned when I started nursing school?" Her expression immediately changed. The warm smile faded, replaced by something I had never seen in her eyes before, a mixture of sadness and anger that made my stomach drop. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching for my hand with trembling fingers. "I have been wondering when you would ask about that." My heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "I gave your parents $50,000 3 years ago," she said slowly, each word deliberate and painful. "It was specifically for your education. Every penny was meant to ensure you could finish school without drowning in debt." The world seemed to tilt sideways. $50,000. "I made it very clear to your mother and father that this money was not to be touched for anything else." Grandma Rose continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I even had my lawyer draw up papers specifying that it was designated for Serafina Morrison's educational expenses only." I felt sick, physically, nauseously sick. "Grandma, they never told me about any money. I have been working myself to death trying to afford school, and I am still going to graduate with massive debt." Her face crumpled, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "I suspected something was wrong when your mother stopped giving me updates about your studies. Every time I asked how you were managing financially, she would change the subject or give vague answers about how everything was fine." "They bought Kelsey a BMW?" I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. $30,000, yesterday, They said they saved up for it. The change in my grandmother was immediate and startling. Her back straightened, her grip on my hand tightened, and I saw a flash of the formidable woman she had been before. Age and illness had weakened her body. "Those bastards," she said, and I had never heard my sweet, church-going grandmother use language like that in my entire life. "They stole from you, Serafina. They stole your future and gave it to that spoiled child." We sat in silence for several minutes while I processed this information. My parents had not just hidden money from me, they had actively stolen money that was designated for my education and used it to fund my sister's privileged lifestyle. The betrayal cut deeper than I had ever imagined possible. "There is more," Grandma Rose said quietly. "That 50,000 was not the only money I have given them over the years." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "When Kelsey wanted to go on that expensive school trip to Europe 2 years ago, they said the family was struggling financially. I gave them $8,000 to help out. When she needed orthodontic work, I contributed another 12,000. Every time they came to me with stories about financial hardship, I helped because I thought they were genuinely struggling to provide for both my granddaughters." I did quick mental math and realized my grandmother had given my parents over $70,000 in the past 3 years alone. Meanwhile, I had been working multiple jobs, applying for every scholarship I could find, and still barely scraping by. "They have been playing me for a fool," Grandma Rose said, her voice now filled with cold determination. "And more importantly, they have been cheating you out of opportunities that were rightfully yours." "What can we do?" I asked, feeling helpless and overwhelmed. My grandmother's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw the sharp businesswoman she had been before retirement. "Oh, sweetheart, we are going to do much more than just confront them. They think I am just a weak old woman they can manipulate and lie to. They have no idea what I am capable of when someone hurts my family." She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out her phone. "But first we need to gather evidence. I want you to document everything. Every lie they have told you about money, every expense they claim they cannot afford, while your sister gets everything she wants. We are going to build a case that will expose exactly what kind of people your parents really are." As I watched my grandmother's transformation from frail, elderly woman to strategic mastermind, I realized that the parents I thought I knew had never existed at all. 2 weeks after my conversation with Grandma Rose, I had compiled a devastating portfolio of evidence that painted a picture of financial manipulation spanning years. Bank statements my grandmother provided showed regular large transfers to my parents, always coinciding with major purchases for Kelsey. Her car designer clothes, expensive school trips, and even a professional photography session for her social media portfolio. Meanwhile, I had documented every conversation where my parents had claimed poverty when I needed help. The time I asked for $200 for textbooks and was told money was too tight. The Christmas when I received discount store gifts while Kelsey unwrapped a $1,000 laptop. The countless occasions when I ate generic brand groceries while Kelsey enjoyed expensive organic food and restaurant meals. But Grandma Rose was building something bigger than just financial evidence. During our daily visits, she had been making phone calls to relatives, family, friends, and even my parents' neighbors. What she discovered was a pattern of deception that went far beyond stealing my education fund. "Your Aunt Margaret told me something very interesting yesterday," Grandma Rose said during one of our strategy sessions in her room. She was sitting up straighter these days, energized by our mission for justice. "Remember when your parents said they could not afford to visit me last Christmas because money was too tight for gas and hotel expenses?" I nodded, remembering how guilty I had felt about that. I had scraped together money from my own meager savings to buy Grandma Rose extra presents to make up for my parents' absence. "Well, Margaret saw them at the ski resort in Aspen that same weekend. Kelsey posted dozens of photos on social media from their luxury cabin rental. The cabin alone cost more than what they claimed they could not afford for a simple visit to see me." My stomach churned with a familiar mixture of anger and disgust. "They lied to you about Christmas so they could spend money on Kelsey's vacation. It gets worse." Grandma Rose continued, her voice taking on the steely edge I was beginning to recognize. I called Mrs. Henderson your neighbor for the past 15 years. She told me about the time your mother borrowed $3,000 from her emergency fund, claiming it was for urgent medical bills that insurance would not cover. Medical bills. I frowned. Nobody in our family has had any serious medical issues. Exactly. But do you remember what happened around that same time last year? I thought back and then it hit me. Kelsey's graduation party, the one with the catered food professional DJ and rented party tent in the backyard. Bingo! Grandma Rose's eyes flashed with satisfaction. Your mother never paid Mrs. Henderson back, by the way. She keeps making excuses about tight finances while Kelsey drives around in that BMW. The scope of my parents' deception was staggering. They had not just stolen from me, they had been systematically lying to and borrowing money from friends, neighbors, and family members for years, all to fund Kelsey's privileged lifestyle while portraying themselves as struggling parents just trying to get by. We have enough evidence now, I said, looking through the folder of documents we had accumulated. What is our next move? Grandma Rose smiled, and there was something almost predatory about it. Tomorrow is Kelsey's graduation party, correct? The big celebration your parents have been planning for months. Yes, they invited half the neighborhood and all our relatives. Mom has been cooking for days, and Dad rented those expensive party tents again. Perfect. We are going to make an announcement. My heart started racing. What kind of announcement? The kind that exposes the truth in front of everyone who matters. Your Aunt Margaret will be there, Mrs. Henderson, all the neighbors who have been lied to and borrowed from over the years. Even that lawyer friend of your father's who supposedly helped them with their financial planning. I felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Grandma, are you sure about this? Once we do this, there is no going back. The whole family will explode. She reached over and took my hand in both of hers. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone who had seemed so frail just weeks earlier. Serafina, honey, they destroyed your future without a second thought. They have been stealing from me, lying to our friends and neighbors, and teaching your sister that she deserves everything while you deserve nothing. This family was already destroyed. We are just going to make sure everyone else sees what I should have seen years ago. The next evening, I stood in my parents' backyard watching Kelsey hold court in the center of a crowd of admirers. She was wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than I made in 2 months at the diner, talking animatedly about her plans to attend the expensive private college that my parents claimed they could not afford to help me with. My mother was bustling around playing the perfect hostess, accepting compliments on the beautiful party setup and her daughter's achievements. My father was manning the professional-grade grill they had somehow acquired, laughing loudly with his buddies about his successful daughter and how proud he was to be able to provide such a wonderful celebration. I felt sick watching them perform this charade of being caring, financially responsible parents, when I knew the truth about where every dollar had come from. At exactly 7:30 as planned, Grandma Rose arrived. I had arranged for a medical transport service to bring her from the facility, and she was dressed in her best outfit with her hair freshly styled. She looked more alert and determined than I had seen her in months. Everyone, my mother called out, clapping her hands together. Look who is here! Grandma Rose made it to Kelsey's party. The crowd gathered around as my grandmother's wheelchair was positioned in the center of the patio. Kelsey bent down to give her a perfunctory hug, already eager to return to her friends and their admiration. Thank you all for being here tonight, Grandma Rose said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet backyard. I wanted to celebrate Kelsey's graduation, but I also have some important family business to discuss. My mother's smile faltered slightly. Mom, maybe we should save family business for later. This is Kelsey's special night. Oh, but this involves Kelsey directly, Grandma Rose replied smoothly. You see, everyone, I have been very generous to this family over the years, very generous indeed, and I think it is time everyone knew exactly how generous I have been and how that generosity has been used. The backyard fell completely silent. I could see my father's face turning pale as he realized what was about to happen. 3 years ago, I gave my son and daughter-in-law $50,000, Grandma Rose announced clearly. That money was specifically designated for Serafina's college education, every penny of it. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Mrs. Henderson's eyes widen with sudden understanding. Instead, that money was used to purchase a $30,000 BMW for Kelsey, and the rest has disappeared into other luxuries, while my eldest granddaughter works multiple jobs and struggles to afford basic textbooks. The murmur turned into shocked gasps and whispered conversations. My mother stepped forward, her face flushed. "Mom, I think you are confused about—" "I am not confused about anything." Grandma Rose cut her off sharply. "I have bank records, receipts, and documentation of every lie you have told me, every neighbor you have borrowed money from, and every time you have claimed poverty while spending thousands on unnecessary luxuries." She gestured toward me, and I stepped forward with our folder of evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the family members who have been systematically defrauded for the past 3 years." The aftermath of Grandma Rose's public revelation was immediate and explosive. Within minutes of her announcement, the carefully orchestrated graduation party dissolved into chaos. Kelsey ran into the house in tears. My father disappeared into the garage, and my mother stood frozen in the center of the backyard like a deer caught in headlights, while neighbors and relatives peppered her with questions and accusations. But the most significant moment came when Mrs. Henderson approached me with fire in her eyes. "That $3,000 your mother borrowed for medical bills," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I knew something was off about that story. My husband had cancer last year, and I needed that money for his treatments. Your mother looked me straight in the eye and swore it was a life-or-death emergency." Mr. Peterson from 2 houses down stepped forward. "They borrowed $1,500 from us last winter, said it was for emergency car repairs. Then I see Kelsey driving around in a brand new BMW the next month." "Wait!" said my Aunt Margaret, her voice rising with indignation. "They asked me for $2,000 last summer for Seraphina's school expenses. They said she was struggling and needed help with tuition." I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger. I never received a single penny from anyone. I did not even know people were being told they were helping me. The crowd was growing more agitated by the minute as more neighbors and relatives began sharing their own stories of loans that were never repaid and sob stories that were apparently fabricated. I realized that my parents had been running a sophisticated con game for years, using different excuses with different people, but always ending with the same result: money flowing into Kelsey's lifestyle, while I remained completely unaware. Grandma Rose, still seated regally in her wheelchair at the center of the chaos, raised her hand for silence. "There is more," she announced. "Much more." She nodded at me, and I opened our evidence folder. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady as I began reading from the documentation we had compiled. "Over the past 3 years, my parents have received a total of $78,000 from my grandmother alone. This includes the $50,000 education fund that was legally designated for my use, plus multiple smaller amounts ranging from $5,000 to $12,000 each always, accompanied by stories about financial hardship." I looked up at the faces surrounding me, some shocked, some angry, some calculating the implications of what they were hearing. During this same period, they borrowed approximately $23,000 from neighbors, relatives, and family friends. The excuses included medical emergencies, car trouble, job loss, and educational expenses for me. None of these emergencies were real, and I never received any educational assistance from anyone. Mrs. Henderson pulled out her phone. "I am calling my lawyer first thing Monday morning. This is fraud, plain and simple." "Now wait just a minute." My mother finally found her voice, stepping forward with her hands raised defensively. "You are all taking this out of context. Yes, we received help from family and friends, but raising 2 daughters is expensive, and we have always intended to pay everyone back when we could." "With what money?" demanded Mr. Peterson. "You just bought your daughter a $30,000 car while owing money to half the neighborhood." My father finally emerged from the garage, his face red and his voice aggressive. "This is our private family business, and I do not appreciate it being aired out like this at our daughter's graduation party." "Oil, your private family business became public business the moment you started stealing from people," Aunt Margaret shot back. "Do you have any idea how many sleepless nights I spent worrying about whether I had done enough to help Seraphina with her education? I sent you that money thinking I was helping my niece achieve her dreams." "You were helping," my mother insisted. Everything we did was for our family, for both our daughters. Everything you did was for Kelsey, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. When did you ever use any of that money to help me? When did you ever even tell me that people were trying to help me? The crowd fell silent, waiting for an answer that never came. That is when Uncle James, my father's older brother, who had driven in from 2 states away for the graduation, stepped forward with a grim expression on his face. "There is something else you all should know," he said, looking directly at my parents. Something I probably should have said years ago. My father's face went completely white. "James, do not—" "No, I am done keeping your secrets," Uncle James interrupted firmly. "When Dad died 5 years ago and left us each an inheritance, you told everyone that you used your share to pay off the mortgage on this house." I felt my stomach drop. My grandfather had died when I was 17, and I remembered my parents talking about how relieved they were that the inheritance had allowed them to become debt-free homeowners. "But that was not true, was it?" Uncle James continued. "Because I helped you refinance this house just 2 years ago when you said you were struggling with payments. The mortgage was never paid off with Dad's money." "Where did that inheritance money go?" Grandma Rose asked quietly, but her voice carried across the entire backyard. Uncle James looked at Kelsey's BMW sitting prominently in the driveway, then at the expensive party setup around us, and finally at my parents' faces. "I think we all know where it went," he said sadly. "The same place every other dollar has gone for years. Into creating a fantasy life for one daughter, while the other daughter was told the family could not afford to help her." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the neighbors who did not know our family well could see the pattern that had emerged. My parents had been systematically lying to and stealing from everyone in their orbit for years, all to maintain Kelsey's privileged lifestyle, while I struggled and worked multiple jobs just to survive. But the most shocking moment came when Kelsey herself finally emerged from the house, her makeup running and her face red from crying. "I did not know," she said, her voice small and broken. "I swear to God, I did not know any of this. Every time I asked about money or felt guilty about expensive things, Mom and Dad told me we were doing fine, that I deserved these things because I worked hard in school." She looked at me with tears streaming down her face. "Serafina, I had no idea you were struggling. I thought you worked those jobs because you wanted to, not because you had to. They told me you were independent and did not want family help." For the first time in years, I saw my sister not as the spoiled princess who got everything while I got nothing, but as another victim of our parents' manipulation. She had been lied to just as much as everyone else, just in a different way. "This ends now," Grandma Rose announced, her voice cutting through the emotional chaos. "Tomorrow morning I am calling my lawyer. We are going to recover every penny that was stolen. We are going to ensure that everyone who was defrauded gets paid back, and we are going to make sure this never happens again." She looked directly at my parents, who were now standing together but somehow seemed more isolated than ever. "You have 48 hours to come up with a plan to make this right voluntarily. After that, we handle this through the courts, and I guarantee you will not like how that turns out." As the crowd began to disperse, with neighbors and relatives exchanging contact information and talking about coordinating their legal responses, I realized that everything had changed, not just for my parents, but for our entire family dynamic. The lies that had defined our relationships for years had been exposed, and there was no going back to pretending everything was normal. But for the first time since I was a child, I felt like I had real allies who understood what had been done to me and were willing to fight for justice. The question now was whether my parents would try to make things right, or whether we would have to force justice through the legal system. Based on their expressions as they watched their world crumble around them, I had a feeling we were going to end up in court. The 48 hours Grandma Rose had given my parents turned into a week of tense negotiations, hushed phone calls, and what I thought was genuine progress toward making things right. My parents had scheduled a family meeting for the following Sunday, claiming they had worked out a comprehensive repayment plan that would satisfy everyone who had been defrauded. I should have known it was too good to be true. The meeting was held at Uncle James's house, neutral territory, that felt safer for everyone involved. Grandma Rose had been transported from her facility, and several of the defrauded neighbors had been invited to hear the proposed solution. The atmosphere was cautious but hopeful as we gathered in his spacious living room. My father stood up first, looking haggard but determined. "We want to start by acknowledging that we made serious mistakes in how we handled family finances and communications with all of you," he began. "We never intended for anyone to feel deceived or cheated." My mother nodded along her eyes, red from what appeared to be days of crying. "We got caught up in trying to provide for our daughters and lost sight of our obligations to the people who trusted us." So far, this sounded promising. I caught Grandma Rose's eye and she gave me a small nod of cautious approval. "We have worked out a payment plan," my father continued, "that will allow us to repay everyone over the next 3 years while still maintaining our household and ensuring both our daughters can continue their education." He handed out printed copies of a detailed spreadsheet showing monthly payments to each person who had loaned them money. The numbers looked reasonable and the timeline seemed achievable based on their combined income. But then Uncle James spoke up and everything went sideways. "This looks very thorough," he said, examining the spreadsheet carefully. "But I have to ask, have you discussed this plan with your financial advisor?" My parents exchanged a look I could not quite interpret. "What financial advisor?" my mother asked. "The one you have been working with for the past 2 years. Uncle James replied, his voice taking on a suspicious edge. "The one who helped you make those smart investment decisions that allowed you to afford Kelsey's car and all these party expenses." I felt my stomach drop. "What investments?" Uncle James looked confused. "The ones your parents told me about when I offered to co-sign a loan for them last year. They said they did not need help because their financial advisor had set them up with some very profitable investment accounts." The room fell completely silent. My parents were staring at Uncle James like he had just spoken in a foreign language. "James," my father said slowly, "we never told you about any financial advisor or investment accounts." "Yes, you did," Uncle James insisted, pulling out his phone. "I have text messages. You sent me screenshots of account balances and talked about how well your portfolio was performing." He showed his phone to my father, whose face went completely white as he read the messages. "I did not send these," my father whispered. That is when the horrible truth began to emerge. Uncle James had not just been a neutral family member trying to help mediate our situation. He had been actively communicating with someone he thought was my father for months. Someone who had been feeding him false information about our family's financial situation and using that information to manipulate his responses to our crisis. "If you did not send these messages," Uncle James said, his voice growing cold, "then who did?" The answer came from the most unexpected source. Kelsey, who had been sitting quietly in the corner throughout the meeting, suddenly burst into tears. "It was me," she sobbed. "I sent those messages. I have been pretending to be Dad for months." The room erupted in shocked exclamations and demands for explanation. I felt like I was watching my world collapse for the second time in 2 weeks. "Why?" Grandma Rose asked, her voice deadly quiet. "Because I knew this was all going to come out eventually," Kelsey cried. "I knew about the money, about the loans, about all of it. I have known for over a year." My head was spinning. "You knew, and you said nothing. I tried to tell them to stop, but they said it was temporary, that they would figure out how to pay everyone back," Kelsey continued through her tears. "But then Uncle James started asking questions and offering to help, and I panicked. I thought if I could convince him that we were doing better financially than we actually were, he would stop investigating." "So you impersonated our father and fabricated evidence of financial success?" Aunt Margaret asked incredulously. "I was trying to protect the family," Kelsey insisted. "I thought if I could just buy us some time, Mom and Dad would figure out a real solution." Uncle James stood up, his face red with anger. "You manipulated me for months. You made me believe that this family was financially stable when you knew damn well that my brother and sister-in-law were running a con game on everyone we know." "It was not a con game," my mother protested weakly. "Then what would you call it?" Uncle James shot back. "You took money under false pretenses. You lied about your financial situation to everyone who tried to help you. And now I find out that your 18-year-old daughter has been catfishing me for months to cover up your crimes." But the worst revelation was yet to come. Kelsey was not finished confessing. "There is more," she said, her voice barely audible. "The repayment plan Dad just showed you. It is not real. They do not have jobs anymore." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. "What do you mean they do not have jobs?" Grandma Rose asked. "Dad was fired from the garage 3 weeks ago for borrowing tools and not returning them. Mom lost her cleaning contracts when one of her clients accused her of stealing jewelry. They have been pretending to go to work every day, but they have been spending their time trying to figure out how to disappear." I felt physically sick. Disappear. "They were planning to declare bankruptcy and move to another state," Kelsey continued. "They said it was the only way to escape all the debt and legal problems. They were going to take me with them and leave you here to deal with the aftermath." The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that I could not even process it emotionally. My parents had not just stolen from me and lied to everyone we knew. They had been planning to abandon me entirely while taking my sister and starting over somewhere else. Uncle James was already pulling out his phone. "I am calling the police." "Wait," my father said desperately. "We can still work this out. We just need more time." "You had time." Grandma Rose said, her voice filled with a cold fury I had never heard before. "You had years to do the right thing, weeks to come clean, and days to present an honest solution. Instead, you doubled down on lies and planned to abandon your daughter to clean up your mess." She looked at Uncle James. "Make the call." As Uncle James dialed 911, I realized that the family meeting I had hoped would bring resolution had instead revealed that the betrayal was even deeper and more calculated than any of us had imagined. The ally I thought I had gained in my sister had been working against me all along, and my parents were not just thieves. They were cowards planning to run away from the consequences of their actions. Justice was no longer just about recovering stolen money. It was about making sure they could never do this to anyone else again. The police arrived within 20 minutes of Uncle James's call, and what happened next transformed our family crisis into a full-scale criminal investigation. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, took one look at the evidence we had compiled and immediately recognized that we were dealing with something much more sophisticated than simple family financial disputes. "This is organized fraud," she said after reviewing Grandma Rose's documentation and Uncle James's fabricated text messages. "What you are describing is a pattern of systematic deception designed to extract money from multiple victims using different false narratives." She set up a temporary command center in Uncle James's dining room and began interviewing each family member separately. What emerged during these interviews was evidence of criminal behavior that extended far beyond what any of us had realized. The breakthrough came when Detective Santos interviewed Mrs. Henderson about the $3,000 she had loaned for fake medical expenses. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that my mother had provided her with official-looking medical bills and insurance correspondence to justify the emergency loan. "Do you still have those documents?" Detective Santos asked. "Of course," Mrs. Henderson replied. "I keep records of everything." When she produced the paperwork, Detective Santos's expression grew very serious. The medical bills were not just exaggerated. They were completely fabricated, created using stolen letterhead from a local hospital and forged doctor signatures. "This is not just fraud," Detective Santos explained to our assembled group. "This is identity theft, forgery, and mail fraud. These are federal crimes." But the most shocking discovery came when she ran background checks on my parents as part of her investigation. It turned out that their financial crimes were not limited to our family and neighbors. "Your parents have been involved in similar schemes in 2 other states over the past decade," Detective Santos revealed. "They moved here 5 years ago after being investigated for charity fraud in Ohio. Before that, they were questioned about insurance fraud in Pennsylvania." I felt the room spinning around me. "Are you saying they are professional con artists?" "I am saying they have a documented history of using emotional manipulation and false documentation to extract money from trusting people, usually targeting elderly relatives, neighbors, and church communities." Grandma Rose, who had been listening intently from her wheelchair, suddenly spoke up. "Detective Santos, I want to show you something else." She directed me to retrieve a box from her care facility that she had asked me to bring to the meeting. Inside were years of financial records correspondence and what appeared to be a detailed investigative file. "I have been suspicious about my son and daughter-in-law for much longer than I let on," she admitted. "When they first asked me for money 3 years ago, something felt wrong about their story, so I hired a private investigator." The room fell completely silent as Detective Santos began examining the private investigator's report. It was a comprehensive document spanning over 2 years of surveillance financial analysis and background research. "According to this report, your parents have been living far beyond their declared income for years," Detective Santos said. The investigator documented luxury purchases, expensive vacations, and lifestyle choices that were completely inconsistent with their supposed financial struggles. But the most damning evidence was a series of photographs showing my parents at various high-end restaurants, shopping centers, and entertainment venues during times when they had claimed to relatives that they were too broke to afford basic necessities. "There are also recordings," Grandma Rose said quietly. "What kind of recordings?" I asked. "The investigator installed listening devices in the car I loaned them for 6 months last year when they said their car had broken down and they could not afford repairs." Detective Santos raised an eyebrow. "That may not be admissible in court depending on state laws." "It does not matter," Grandma Rose replied. "The recordings led the investigator to discover their real financial accounts, the ones they have been hiding from everyone, including the IRS. This revelation hit like a bomb. My parents had not just been stealing money and spending it frivolously, they had been maintaining secret offshore accounts to hide their theft from tax authorities." "How much money are we talking about?" Uncle James asked. Detective Santos was reviewing the private investigator's financial analysis. "According to this report, they have moved approximately $400,000 through various accounts over the past 5 years. $400,000. The number was so staggering that I could not even process it. That was enough money to pay for multiple college educations, buy several houses, or fund comfortable retirements for everyone they had defrauded." "Where did all that money come from?" I asked weakly. "Based on this investigation, it appears they have been running similar schemes in multiple communities simultaneously," Detective Santos explained. "They would target elderly relatives in one town, church members in another, and neighbors in a third location, always using different sob stories but the same basic approach." The scope of their criminal enterprise was breathtaking. My parents were not just desperate people who had made bad financial decisions. They were career criminals who had been systematically defrauding people across multiple states for years. But Detective Santos was not finished revealing the extent of their crimes. "There is also evidence of identity theft involving both of their daughters," she said, looking at me and then at Kelsey. "They have been using your names and social security numbers to open credit accounts and apply for loans." My blood turned to ice. "What does that mean for us?" "It means your credit may be damaged, you may have debt obligations you do not know about, and you could potentially face legal consequences for their actions if we cannot clearly establish that you were not involved." This was when our new ally stepped forward in the most unexpected way. Detective Santos pulled out her business card and handed it to me. "Ms. Morrison, I want you to know that based on the evidence I have seen today, I am personally committed to ensuring that you and your sister are protected from any legal or financial consequences of your parents' actions. You are victims here, not accomplices." She turned to address the entire room. "I am also going to make sure that everyone who was defrauded gets their money back. We have located their hidden accounts, and asset forfeiture laws will allow us to recover the stolen funds." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not just for financial recovery, but for the possibility that justice might actually be served. "What happens next?" Grandma Rose asked. "Next, I arrest your son and daughter-in-law on multiple felony charges," Detective Santos replied matter-of-factly. "They are going to prison for a very long time." As if on cue, we heard car doors slamming outside. My parents, who had left during the police interviews claiming they needed to get some fresh air, were trying to quietly return to the house. They had no idea that Detective Santos had already issued warrants for their arrest based on the evidence we had provided. "Ladies and gentlemen," Detective Santos said, standing up and adjusting her handcuffs, Justice is about to be served. Through the window, I watched my parents walking toward the house, completely unaware that their years of lies, theft, and manipulation were about to catch up with them in the most dramatic way possible. The family meeting they had called to present their fake repayment plan was about to become the scene of their arrest for multiple felonies across several states. The arrest happened so quickly that it felt almost surreal. Detective Santos positioned herself by the front door while backup officers surrounded the house. When my parents walked in, still maintaining their facade of concerned family members trying to work things out, they were immediately read their rights and handcuffed. My mother's shocked protests echoed through Uncle James's living room as Detective Santos explained the charges: multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, forgery, tax evasion, and racketeering across 3 states. My father just stood there in stunned silence, finally understanding that their years of criminal behavior had caught up with them. "This has to be a mistake," my mother kept repeating as she was led away. "We were just trying to provide for our family." But there were no mistakes. Within 48 hours, Detective Santos had coordinated with federal authorities to freeze all their hidden accounts, seize their assets, and begin the process of recovering funds for victim restitution. The BMW was impounded. The house was placed under asset forfeiture proceedings, and their elaborate web of lies unraveled completely. The most satisfying moment came 3 days later when Detective Santos called to inform us that they had recovered over $380,000 from various hidden accounts. After legal fees and processing costs, there would be enough money to fully reimburse every victim with substantial amounts left over. "Ms. Morrison," she said during that phone call, "your $50,000 education fund will be restored with interest. Additionally, because of the identity theft charges involving your credit, you are entitled to additional compensation for damages." I was going to receive nearly $70,000, enough to finish nursing school debt-free and start my career without the financial burden that had haunted me for years. But the money, while important, was not the most meaningful part of what happened next. Kelsey, who had been staying with Uncle James since our parents' arrest, came to see me at my apartment one evening with red eyes and a carefully prepared speech. "I know I can never undo what I did," she said, sitting across from me at my tiny kitchen table. "I know I was complicit in stealing your future, and I know my fake text messages made everything worse when you were trying to get justice." She was right, and I was not ready to pretend otherwise just to make her feel better. "But I want you to know that I am dropping out of the expensive college and enrolling in community college instead," she continued. "I am going to get a job and pay my own way through school. I do not want anything that was bought with stolen money." This surprised me. "What about your BMW? It was seized by the police, remember? But even if it had not been, I would have sold it. I cannot drive around in something that represents everything wrong with how I was raised." Over the following weeks, something unexpected began to develop between my sister and me. Without our parents' toxic influence and competitive manipulation, we started to get to know each other as actual people rather than rivals for resources and attention. I discovered that Kelsey had been struggling with guilt and anxiety for years, knowing that her lifestyle was somehow connected to my struggles, but never understanding the full scope of what was happening. She had been as much a victim of our parents' manipulation as I was, just in a different way. Meanwhile, Grandma Rose was experiencing what she called her Phoenix Rising phase. The stress and excitement of orchestrating justice had given her more energy and mental clarity than she had experienced since her stroke. She decided to move out of the assisted living facility and into a small apartment near my nursing school. "I wasted too many years being a passive victim of their lies," she told me as we furnished her new living room with furniture bought from the restitution funds. "I am not spending whatever time I have left being helpless, when I could be helping you build the life you deserve." The chosen family that emerged from the destruction of our biological family was stronger and more supportive than anything I had experienced growing up. Uncle James became a father figure who actually showed up when needed. Aunt Margaret became the mother I wished I had always had. Even Mrs. Henderson and other defrauded neighbors became part of an extended support network that celebrated my achievements and offered genuine help without hidden agendas. 6 months after my parents' arrest, I received notification that they had both pled guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for reduced sentences. My father received 8 years in federal prison, and my mother received 6 years. They would be eligible for parole in 4 and 3 years respectively, but they would be permanently banned from living in our state and would be required to maintain no contact orders with all their victims. The day I received my nursing degree, paid for entirely with recovered funds from my education account, I looked out at the graduation ceremony audience and saw my real family cheering for me. Grandma Rose in her wheelchair in the front row, Uncle James and Aunt Margaret beaming with pride, Kelsey holding a homemade sign with my name, and even Detective Santos, who had taken a personal interest in my success story. There were no biological parents in that audience, but there was something much more valuable. People who had chosen to love and support me based on who I was rather than what I could provide for them. The final piece of justice came a year later when I received a letter from the federal prison where my parents were incarcerated. It was not an apology. I had not expected one and would not have believed it if they had tried. Instead, it was a notification that they had been ordered to pay additional restitution to cover the cost of therapy and credit repair for both Kelsey and me. Even from prison, they were still being held accountable for the damage they had caused. Today, I work as a registered nurse at the same hospital where my fake medical bills had been created. Every time I walk past the billing department, I think about how their criminal lies had been exposed and how that exposure had led to my freedom. Kelsey graduated from community college with honors and is now studying to become a social worker specializing in financial abuse cases. She says she wants to help other families recognize the warning signs we all missed for so many years. And Grandma Rose, now 87 years old, volunteers with Detective Santos to help train other law enforcement officers on how to investigate family financial crimes. The family that raised me may have been built on lies and theft, but the family I chose has been built on truth, justice, and genuine love. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not just exposing the truth. It is using that truth to build something better than what was destroyed. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were living double lives at your expense? Have you had to choose between family loyalty and seeking justice? When the two were incompatible, I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes knowing we are not alone in these experiences makes all the difference. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate justice resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of karma, revenge, and finding your chosen family. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it is possible to rebuild your life even after the most devastating betrayals. Thank you for being part of my journey from victim to survivor, to someone who can help others recognize that blood does not always mean family, and family does not always share your blood. Here is to building lives based on truth, surrounding ourselves with people who genuinely care about our success, and never being afraid to seek justice when we have been wronged.